You ever stop and wonder if the voice in your head is even yours? What if the thing holding you back isn't your ability, but a belief that you picked up from someone else? Food for thought. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Evolv podcast, where we talk about growth, grit, and getting out of our own way. I'm your host, Caleb Welch, and today's episode is one that I have been looking so forward to, and I am super excited about. We're diving into the stories we carry and the ones that we never chose. Joining me today is someone who's been helping leaders and entrepreneurs rethink the way that they show up in the world. You might know him from the executive panel if you follow him on LinkedIn or his website, but they are sparking conversations about mindset, leadership, and legacy. So Curtis Smith, welcome to the show.
You know what, Caleb? It's great to be here. I'm glad that I get to be a part of this. And you told me previously when we were first starting this, before we actually got started, there's pretty big news that's actually attached to where you're sitting today. So I think that that's something that is to be celebrated. In coach fashion, let's look to celebrate the wins. But I think the other thing is that for people watching, we're not just professional colleagues. We're not just people that happen to know each other. You know, we grew up together. So I've known him at his best. I've known him at his most annoying.
Fair.
And it is wonderful to actually be here, to know where we all have started from and where life has kind of taken us, and to be sitting in these seats, having these conversations. It's mind-blowing when you really take everything holistically into the picture like that. So I'm glad to be here, and I'm excited for our conversation today.
Awesome, man. I couldn't agree more. Just being able to sit in this type of seat and have this conversation is one of those surreal moments. And I really appreciate you hopping on and joining me today. So for those listening, I think what we want to do today is we want to talk about a few different pieces. And so I'm going to break this into some small segments. And the first one is talking about the journey behind the journey. So Curtis, let's start with kind of where you're at now today. Let's talk about client journey. You've worked with a lot of people in different roles and in different segments of the industries and the spaces. What's something that you think you've noticed about the way people define success?
I mean, that's number one, it's varied. It's extremely varied the way that people define success, because success does not, and it will not ever look exactly the same to everybody. Now, of course, you have stereotypical components that a lot of people attach to it, right? Did I achieve what I was setting out to achieve? Or did I do what I said I was going to end up doing? Or did I get the result or somewhat close to the result that I was looking for, right? But I mean, all in all, a lot of these things are subjective, because you can have somebody that's extremely difficult on themselves, and to them, they feel like I didn't get near what I wanted accomplished. And so therefore I feel like I failed. While everybody else around them is like, oh my God, I can't believe you got all these different things done. I can't believe that we've been able to make the progress that we've made. This is exceptional. This surpasses our expectations. So you have this exorbitant amount of praise on one side, but then that self-conversation that's happening is just completely defeating that win that you should be celebrating. So I think that success is subjective from a lot of different angles when we actually talk about it.
Do you feel like, and I can't help but think about this, do you feel like society has set any kind of standard around success, though, when it comes to the
Yes, I do believe that there are things that society as a whole has stated these are kind of the norms. But the reality is that it's also dependent on the environment or culture in which somebody finds themselves in. Because the overall culture of an environment can dramatically change that perception of what success looks like, how hard driven it is. Is it more around the result, or is it more around actually just trying to get a result? So I think that the answer is yes, but it's a little more nuanced, because you have so many different types of people, so many different types of environments, and so many different cultures that if you try to examine it, like zoom out and examine it from a bigger picture, the reality is that it's all based on that individual environment and what they specifically believe or perceive.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair assessment. I see a lot of different people thinking that a certain dollar amount or a certain vehicle they drive or a certain status in their cliques and groups of people is a definition of success. And so that's why I just wanted someone else's take, because I don't view success that way, but I think there's a lot of people out there that do. And this goes into kind of what we want to talk about today. Like, where did that story come from? Where does the definition of success come from? Did you define it, or did someone else set that definition for you, and are you stuck with it for no reason, right? And that comes back to kind of the purpose of today's podcast and why you and I wanted to connect. So let me ask you this: with your different experiences in the coaching sector, have you ever seen someone have like a breakthrough, but not because they learned something new, but instead it was because they finally let go of something old that they carried?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of examples that I could run, right? I think one that is most pertinent to what you're talking about is I have a client who's a portfolio manager for a large investment company. And the relationships that she's developed in her latest role have been in an environment where it's a very male dominated space. And so when having to interact and engage in the environment, when we very first connected and started on that journey, the reality is that a lot of what she was struggling with wasn't actually direct issues. What they were these concepts of, I'm feeling like I'm the victim because this is what I heard of other people, and something that was kind of a parallel situation or circumstance. So she was hearing what other people had gone through. And those people were legitimate victims, right? Like, they were legitimate victims of the environment in which they found themselves in. But over the course of that year, that first year that we were working together, it was her ability to be able to separate that idea of being a victim and instead evaluating it through the lens of, I'm now in a leadership role. I'm now having to really partake in developing the strategy around the vision of the larger organization and how we implement that further downstream. And so even though this is male dominated, right, I am looking at these conversations, these critical conversations, and because they're not doing things the way that I want them to, or because I feel like every time that I talk to them, I'm getting some form of negative feedback, I'm not getting that positive feedback. It was, well, I'm also not giving them an opportunity to give me positive feedback. I'm also completely negating every time that I do get positive feedback, right? Because, for example, she walks into a room, boss says something really nice about performance, and then starts talking about something that, hey, we need to address this because we need to make sure that, like, for example, I need you to be more confident in these meetings with these clients, right? I need you to really step up and let your voice be heard. I need you to demonstrate greater levels of confidence. And all she heard was, I need you to demonstrate greater levels of confidence, right? She didn't hear the first part. And it was because of a lot of these side stories going on. I say that because once she was able to actually let go of what other people's experiences were, she was actually able to step into where she's at and figure out, okay, how do I communicate with them? How do I do a better job of understanding where I'm at and where I'm going, not where I've been?
Yeah.
And I think when she did that, it was dramatic. I mean, for example, she's already gotten a promotion. She's already achieved everything that she set out originally to achieve. So it's the fact that it only took her a year to do. Like, once she was able to flip that switch, she had no problem breaking through the barriers she thought were going to ultimately lead her down the road of going to an external opportunity.
So it didn't take, I see what you're saying. It didn't take long, but what took the longest was getting out of her own way.
Exactly.
Getting past that thought process or that mindset, whichever it was.
Yeah. And I think, to what you're saying, the longest part of the process is just allowing yourself to become aware to its existence.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, because I talk about it all the time with just what I've learned. And I'm sure you do too, especially in the coaching world. It works this way. But a lot of times, the biggest challenge in anyone is becoming self aware. But I feel like that word is so overused that I don't think some people really understand the true definition of what that means. Being self aware doesn't mean that you know what's around you or you know that you have some flaws. In my opinion, and please jump in if I'm wrong, but self-awareness is about understanding where your opportunities for growth are, whether that's your communication style, a personality trait, a skill set that you want to improve on for your career path. It's not just understanding that those are places for opportunity. I don't call them weaknesses. I don't like that word, but those are places for opportunity, and taking actionable steps to do something about it. That's where self-awareness is really, truly in play. Just knowing about them, to me, is not being self-aware. It's being observant about yourself, but it's not self-awareness. Self-awareness is, I know this is an issue, or I know this is something I want to work on, or I know this is something I want to grow and be better at. Now, here are the actions I'm going to take in order to correct those things and improve and get better.
That's the big piece right there. The reason that I said I think that the longest part of this entire process is really just the self-awareness aspect is because when somebody becomes self-aware, in my experience, they do one of two things. Either they're going to take action, and it's not going to take long for them to, adjust the course that they were previously on, right? Once they're aware and they've had the vulnerability within themselves to say, you know what, this is something that it's not moving me in the direction I want it to. And so now I need to do something different. So they're either going to go that direction, or they're going to become complacent and they're going to accept that particular flaw or that particular issue or that negative trait. And in that setting, that can either become productive or it can be detrimental to their success. Because even if they accept it, right, it's like somebody who's on a football team. If they're not the best wide receiver and they decide to become a corner because they're better at a corner than, trying to be a wide receiver, there's nothing wrong with accepting that, hey, my skill set, the things that I know I'm going to excel at, are over on this side of the field. It's okay to move towards that. And maybe over time we can build up, the opportunities for growth. Maybe over time we can do that. So there are ways to take that acceptance or that complacency and move that into a positive direction, whether it's personally or professionally. But the downside, the destructive side, is when you got the person who's like, I'm phenomenal at this. Everybody around them says you suck because your results are garbage. But yet you keep feeding yourself this line that, no, I'm really good. Everybody else just doesn't see it. And so you never actually end up in a place where you kind of have the ability to succeed, because you start creating these excuses for why you're choosing to accept that, hey, I'm not good in this area because I'm just not in the right environment. I'm not good in this area because these people just don't understand my genius. I'm not good in this area. So you accept the truth of it, but you also don't allow yourself to be able to move past it. So you don't accept that opportunity for growth.
Yeah, it's like it's like you find yourself making excuses.
Exactly.
Right? And I hate using that word with someone who's vulnerable, because you have to be cautious about how you approach people that aren't self-aware. And I've learned this from personal experience. I've used the word excuses to someone and recognized that that's negative to them. But when someone's truly self-aware, when someone's really working on trying to change and adapt, There is no other word but that to describe the things that you're telling yourself. You are making excuses for yourself to either feel better about the poor choices or to feel better about the thing you're not good at, but don't want to take a step in improving. And that's where the detrimental part of, in my opinion, them being successful or not is what helps shape that then. Because the moment you start denying that you're not good enough to work on it and that everyone else out there's nutso because I know I am, it's an excuse you've made for yourself, right? And then you live in that world and you go, well, I don't know why things aren't getting better, but I know it's going to happen someday. Someday never comes when you aren't taking actionable steps to do so. And if that actionable step is to recognize it and move on and play harder into your other strengths, like you said, switching your talents to the other side of the field, like that's still an actionable step. And that's a great self-awareness move to make. But you have to be able to adjust, like to justify the move and why you're able to do that and not make an excuse for why you can't.
And you're right. Excuse, the word excuse, it's not taken well by a lot of people. Even people that eventually get to self-awareness, you know, when we talk about growing up, don't make excuses. That's not an excuse. The reason that we look at it negatively is because it's always used in a negative context.
Yeah,
and
that's
so
true.
instead of looking at it as a way to be able to differentiate between what is true, you know, what's reality versus what is fallacy, there's a quote by I think it's Jack Welch, and I think it's through, you know, with his book Winning. He talks about, you know, and I think it kind of speaks to this, right? It's better to view reality through what's right now, not by what was or what you want it to be. Right. And I think that when we talk about excuses are, you know, if I'm dealing with a client or I'm, you know, even just dealing with a colleague, you know, the way that I like to talk about excuses is that, you know, I like to preface it with, you know, I know what we typically hear when we think of I'm making an excuse. But the reality of what an excuse does is it's giving yourself permission to look past a harder truth that you just might not be willing to accept in the moment.
Yeah. I don't know who said it. I've used it jokingly with the right crowd, but I've always heard like excuses are the nails that build a house of failure. The more that you use them, the less you're able to see what the real truth is and make actual change. Right.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so then when you do that as a foundation to your career, your personal growth, whatever it is, you like, as much as it's kind of funny, you're using the nails to build a house of failure and you're going to feel failure. That's not me saying you're going to fail by using excuses. It's me saying that you will end up at some point down the line when you use enough of them, you will start to feel like you failed. And it's because you've never really, like you said, you've never gotten past the fact that that excuse is really a hard truth that you're not willing to accept. And that's all that it is. And when you can do that, man, can you change things about yourself, your career, your life, the outlook, the perspective, all of those things can drastically change when you stop that piece and go, hey, the excuse I want to make for myself is that I didn't have time to get these tasks done. The reality is I don't find joy in those tasks and I'm not willing to accept that right now because it means I have to make other changes. So it's easier for me to excuse it with, I don't have time because I'm busy. And that's a very blanket generic example, but that's the reality. That's what we do for ourselves. So that kind of leads me, Curtis, to like, let's talk about beliefs that we don't choose. Like, how often do you find that people are operating from a script that maybe isn't even theirs? They've been told, taught, whether it's family, whether it's religion, whether it's business, maybe it's a coach, a mentor, but along the lines, you've ran into people you've worked with and you go, is that like, are you operating off a script? Like, where do you stand on this?
You know, I love where you're going with this one because it takes me to what Daniel Goleman had to say about micromanagement, right? Because when we think about micromanagement, we think of somebody who's just constantly over your shoulder. And we want to call them a jerk. We want to call them retentive. We want to call them all these names that are relative to them and their personality and who they are as an individual and human being. But Daniel Goleman, it's funny because he said micromanagement isn't usually a strategy, it's a symptom of fear. And his work on emotional intelligence actually shows leaders often micromanage because of unresolved insecurity and a lack of trust, not because they want control. So the real fix in all of that isn't even more oversight. It's the building of self-awareness and emotional resilience so that they have the ability to lead with trust rather than with fear.
That's a really good point. So that, I mean, in your opinion, and I agree with you, you're thinking that micromanagement is a very good version of a script that someone's operating from that isn't theirs.
Yeah, think about it. Like, think back to every person who's in, whether it's, on the lower end of the scale or over on the higher end of the scale. You think back to anybody you've ever worked with who was a bit of a micromanager, and think about a lot of the reasons why they would throw out, why they had to micromanage. They wouldn't call it micromanage. A lot of times they'd say, why do I always have to look over your shoulder? Why do I always have to do and the reasons are usually around something that they've picked up in their background, in their experience, because either they have a fear of getting in trouble, getting yelled at by somebody higher up than them. They've gotten burned in the past by other people because they trusted them at one point, but they didn't do their part. And now they had to take on the workload, or they were the only one who ended up doing the work, right? Think of the stereotypical jock who makes the nerds do the homework, right? So
yeah.
Or it's because, hey, they started off early in their leadership career where they had people who would say one thing and do another. And so they could never build the trust to believe that people were going to actually perform. And so when you look at something like micromanagement and you're talking about, taking on the belief structure of other people, like that's micromanagement, in my opinion. That's micromanagement all day long. I think it's a prime example for that because a lot of micromanagement is all based on the past and what other people did, what other people said, how other people acted, and then ultimately the negative emotions that it created for you and your desire to not have those negative emotions again. However, the funny side of that is that by doing it, all you do is create more stress and anxiety in the present because all you're worried about is the fear of what you're trying to avoid.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, listen, you're dead on, I think. And the more I think about it from the micromanagement piece, I think, yeah, that's spot on. Where I would like your take on this too, but I think where I see it happen, especially if we're talking business related, but it's personal too, is it's that old definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result.
Mm-hmm.
How many times do you work with companies, with owners, with individuals, and you say, why do you do it this way? Or new ideas come to the table, whether it's personal or not. Maybe I ask you, Curtis, like, why do you always lift weights on Tuesday in this gym? And you go, because that's how I've always done it. Now, there might be a better gym, a better way to do it, a cheaper cost, but because whoever brought you there the first time, whoever taught that thing has said that's the way we do it. The people that are afraid of change, let's go that route. Like that's really the root of it. The people that are afraid of change are the ones who always say, well, we've always done it this way. And in my mind, that's also another perfect example of an operating from a script that isn't theirs. It's that old story. Have you heard this story about the monkeys in a room with bananas and a ladder?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like, and for those that haven't, I'll give you a short version of it. I actually don't even remember who wrote it or where the research was done, but they have a room full of monkeys in a room, and they have bananas at the top of a ladder. And every time the monkeys go after the bananas and start to climb the ladder, the whole room gets sprayed down with water. But over time, what they do is they remove monkeys from the room. And every time a new monkey comes in, and sees the bananas and goes for it, all the other monkeys start to pull that monkey down until the room is filled with no more monkeys that have ever been sprayed by water. They've never experienced the consequence. But yet, when the new monkey comes in and goes for the bananas, the crowd of monkeys pulls that one down. And that's the mentality that we end up finding ourselves in when we tell ourselves a story, or we believe a script, or we go after that thought process of, well, I've always done it this way, and we're not willing to change. It's like you don't even sometimes know why you believe that at this point.
Yeah.
But you're living a belief. You're living this belief. It's deeply rooted, and you believe that it's always been that way, and you don't even know what the accuracy of that is. And I find that to be interesting. And so I guess to lead into the next part of this, like this belief that we didn't choose, and maybe, and again, whatever you want to share is fine, but do you have a moment in your own life where you realize, like, wait a second, what is this belief? And like, it doesn't feel like mine, and I need to get rid of it, or I need to make a change. Do you have an example of that?
Yeah.
Personally?
Yeah. I mean, I think I had a very early example of that. Now, I grew up in a very, very strict religion. And, there were a lot of different things that were thrown out relative to the conversation between the world versus the church. Right. And
yeah, absolutely.
Early on in my life, because I kept hearing about how bad it is, and at the time, I'm in school. So what's one of the things that they would talk to young people about, right, is how bad the worldly kids at school really are, and what a poor influence they are, and all these other things. And I found myself having to stop because, like you're talking about, a lot of the beliefs that we can absorb as human beings are just a collective of all these different things we've heard other people say, but we've never challenged them, right? We don't actually take the time to audit them. So in that moment, I remember specifically middle school, Piper, auditing. Like, I had to stop and I had to audit. Like, are these people bad people? No. Like, they treat me good. They're nice. They're kind. I didn't feel like our school was one of these schools that you see on television where a bunch of the jocks are just kicking over all these nerds and pushing them into lockers. I'm looking around. I'm like, we got a really good community. So something doesn't align with what I'm hearing at church, right? Something doesn't align with the overall message. And that was my first example of an internal understanding that, hey, just because somebody else is telling me this and it's their belief, I had a quick ascension to understanding that beliefs aren't reality. They're subjective in nature. It's what somebody chooses to say that this is what I'm going to believe in. It's not a hard, fast truth all across the board. And so you have to be able to look at the beliefs you have and say, is this a truth for me? Right? Because that's what beliefs really are about, is that it's about getting to truths that matter and are meaningful to you as an individual. And then once you have a better understanding of those beliefs, then you can find your community. You can find the people that share in certain aspects of your beliefs, and you can collaborate with them and things like that, and find it a little bit easier to move in directions that you want to with the support that is going to be beneficial. But it doesn't mean that every belief you have is going to align with the person next to you.
Yeah. And so that kind of leads me into our closing section. So let's unpack that for a second, and I'll give my take as well after you. But how do you feel we start to untangle that? What are some ways that you believe people can figure out which beliefs are actually theirs? And then what's one small shift that somebody could make today to start rewriting their internal narrative? Like, how do we get to that when you're in the midst of the storm, or let's say you've got the blinders on right now? How would you suggest or relate to getting to untangle all those things?
It doesn't change for me in terms of what I would tell people. It's always the same thing. You have to have intentional self-reflection. And you also have to seek out meaningful feedback from people you trust. And because in the first fact, it's self-reflection is asking yourself the harder questions, right? Get a piece of paper, write down things that you do or believe, and then ask yourself, does this really align with where I'm going in life, what I'm specifically trying to achieve, or the way that I feel about my environment or people or the world around me, right? Asking yourself these harder questions, like when you say these things that you quote unquote believe, you're going to immediately know whether or not they align with the core values that you really have a deep connection to. And if they don't, or if there's something in you that says, well, I really don't care, that might be something worth taking a look at, right? Self-auditing and really getting that self-reflection. But then the thoughtful and meaningful feedback from people you trust, like number one, if you say, well, I don't really trust anybody, that's a problem,
Yeah.
right? That means you got a lot of
Yes.
self-reflection to do to understand, why am I not trusting people? And if you do have people you trust, getting that external perspective is highly beneficial because, in coaching, I'm sure you've heard it. We talk a lot about the known knowns and the unknown, right?
Knowns and the unknown
Right.
unknowns.
So
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
because you're going to have, like we talk about strengths, you have known strengths, but then you have unknown strengths, right? And then you will have some known gaps and you have unknown gaps, right? The person who says, I'm really good at this, and everybody else around him's like, nah, dude, you suck at giving presentations.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's not your strength, buddy.
If you don't get that honest and meaningful feedback, then it's hard to bounce because all you're then going off of is your own perception of who you are and how you perform. And that's not going to help you get better at what you're trying to do. It's not going to help you to advance in what you want to accomplish. It's not going to help you get whatever it is you're looking for in life, because that feedback is essentially either a strong challenge that is going to be meaningful to you to really take time to think about and examine, or it's going to be validation that you're on the right path.
Yeah, I agree with you full-heartedly, and I think to put my spin on it or to give my 2 cents in that regard is I think one of the biggest ways that we need to start in the untangling of this is to really, like you said, write it down, but write it down with intent. It's because in my opinion, as much as I love your advice of the trusting of other people and getting that feedback intentionally, you have to be ready to receive it first. Just going and seeking it doesn't actually solve the problem. I love collaboration and I think it's super important. And I'd love to be able to say, hey, you know what? I'm not really good at these things, or I think I am. I'm going to go ask one of my closest friends, Curtis, and I'm going to get his feedback. And if you give me honest and transparent and great feedback, and I'm not ready for it because it might sting and it might hurt my feelings and it might challenge my ability to stay positive, then the feedback I intentionally went to get does me no good because I'm not ready for it. And I think we have to start internally to say, where I would start is, what drives you? What motivates you? Figure that out first, because if you don't know what that is, where you go get feedback from and who you get it from and what you get feedback on won't matter. But when you know what you're passionate about, and I'll use a collective theme for us for growing up. When you know that music is, you're passionate about music, and when you feel that you're talented, if you go ask all of your best friends if you're a good singer, and you get the answer that, like, no, you're not, but you aren't ready for that, and you go audition, and every time you audition, you don't get the part, or you get a bad score if it's judged, or you're told never to do it again, you weren't ready for that feedback, even though you're passionate about it. But maybe you can be passionate about music in the production world. Maybe you can be passionate about music in helping others succeed and editing and all the different pieces of music. But if you give up on your passion because you weren't ready to receive that feedback, you would never explore those avenues to begin with. And once you got shot down enough from singing or being a vocalist, you would give up on your passion altogether. And I think too often that's what happens. We're not ready for the feedback in the areas that we're passionate about. And so we're not willing to look at all the avenues that can be explored. And coaching is a perfect example of that. I know coaches, and I'm sure you do too, that say, I want to be a health and fitness coach. And in all reality, they're not good at it. They have a lot of knowledge. They don't know how to teach it because they're good at practicing it, but they're not good at teaching it. But in reality, they're great health consultants. And they could take that same avenue, but be a consultant. I'm not here to teach you. I'm here to educate you. I can give you all the information you want and let you go figure out the actionable items to take. There's avenues that could easily pivot. And I think a lot of times we have to start by finding what our passion is. Then you go solicit the feedback you want and be ready to receive good, bad, and indifferent feedback and make your actionable steps out of there.
See, I agree with what you're saying. The only caveat that I would add to that is that I don't think there's a specific way to be ready. Because when you talk about getting feedback, and specifically feedback that's going to challenge an already existing narrative in your own mind, it's not going to sit well, especially if it revolves around something that you're passionate about, right? Now, if you're not passionate about it, you don't really care about it, you already know there's a gap there, you get feedback on it, you're like, yeah, I already knew that. I suck at using Excel. Big deal. Right? But a lot of everything that we've talked about today is normally going to revolve around the things that we're going to struggle with the absolute most, because it doesn't matter how well educated or how well practiced you are at getting feedback and then implementing that feedback. There's always going to be this level of, well, I'm going to get the feedback. And I think a lot of this points to what you're talking about when you talk about coaches. Right? But it's not just coaches, it's coaches, it's mentors, it's people that you trust to be on your side, right? To have the best intentions for you, right? They're looking out for what's in the best interest of you. People that you feel safe around and safe with. Because the reason that I say you need to go get feedback from people you trust is because there's a layer of protection there that allows you to hear what they're saying, not accept it right away, but walk away from that and actually start to mull on it, actually start to review what was said. And at first, somebody who is highly reactive might immediately be like, oh, you're wrong. I should never talk to you about this. This is just ridiculous. I'm going to move on, right? Give that person a week. And then when they come back, you're more than likely, I would say at least 60 to 70% of the time, that person comes back to the conversation. They say, I was thinking about what you said, and there are things that I see. There are times that I can see this. Or they come back really inquisitive. I really want to know why you responded the way that you did. Like, I'd like to know, like, what is the logic that you were using to give that feedback with, right? And it's not going to happen that way all the time, but I don't know that there is, especially when it's something that's so close to the chest. I don't know that there's a way to really be ready to get that.
And maybe I should be more clear when I say ready. When I say be ready for that feedback before you go solicit it, what I really mean is kind of back to what I said earlier, is be self-aware enough that you're willing to take actionable steps on it. You can't just go solicit the feedback and go, if I hear anything negative, I'm just not going to listen. And that's what I mean by being ready. In order to change, there's got to be a level of uncomfortable. And you're going to hear things that are uncomfortable. And that's okay. But if you're not ready to sit and be uncomfortable, to dive into it deeper after you receive that feedback, and not all of the negative feedback is true, don't get me wrong, but if you're not ready for the uncomfortableness of that conversation with your closest friends, don't go solicit it in the first place. That's what I really mean by be ready. And so I appreciate you being more clear too, but you're never going to be ready to hear bad news or negative news. I think you're more ready to hear negative news when you're soliciting ways to grow, as long as you're ready to be uncomfortable, challenged and willing to look at it deeper, because these are people you do truly trust. So there's got to be a smidgen of truth to it, enough for you to look into. If you're going to instantly deny it all, you're not ready to go solicit that feedback.
Well, and I mean, to your point, though, with what you're saying, I think the important thing here is that make sure that you're surrounding yourself with either strong coaches, make sure you're surrounding yourself with strong mentors, strong professional colleagues, strong friends. Because
Yes.
when you say that, in my mind, the first thing that I think, based on my experience in these type of situations, is that the person who's not actually ready to do this isn't doing that on their own. The people that react negatively after getting feedback is because they were told that they had to solicit for that feedback, or they were forced into being given that feedback, right? So it's kind of like the person, who gives a presentation and then has somebody walk up, and then all they want to do is they want to give that person their feedback on how well they performed. But that person didn't solicit it. They didn't ask for it. They weren't ready for it, right?
Yeah, it's like a performance evaluation that you have to do, right? Like, those people that react negatively didn't really want to do it anyway. And when you can do the sandwich garbage all day long, right? Good, something negative, something good all day long. But when you're not ready to receive it, or you're being forced to your point, I think you're right. I think that's another factor. So I would agree.
Because I look at it like, again, I come from a religious household, right? So, and then I spent 7 years in the Navy, right? So I come home on leave. So I come home on leave, and the first thing that I'm hearing about all the different things I'm doing, or the things that I'm saying, or the way that I want to interact, is like walking in and you have this religious mom who's just constantly giving you that unsolicited feedback about what you're doing and how you're living your life. Right. So I'm not ready for that. I'm not looking for any of that. But again, the people who are like, I want to do better, I want to be better, I think what's really helpful for them, that'll make it easier in the transition of accepting these truths that they hear from other people, or help them to better differentiate between what is somebody's false perception of you, right? Because sometimes it could just be intentionality, right? Like, I intend to do this, but I externally do something else that's not giving off the same vibe, right? So they're just misreading what I'm doing, because I'm just not, the person that smiles all the time. So everybody thinks I'm trying to be mean. But in these circumstances, that's where they need to get a good coach. That's where they need to get a good mentor. They need to make sure that they have good professional colleagues or good friends that they can lean on, that are going to help them in these moments, and ask them appropriate, deep lining questions so that they could effectively evaluate what's going on.
Yeah. It's that old saying, you got to surround yourself with the environment that you want. And if you don't like the environment you're in, take a look at what you surround yourself with. It could be people, it could be places and things, but at the end of the day, you've got to pay attention to your surroundings. So to kind of close some things out, just for those listening, if you feel stuck, or if you're feeling like you could be doing more, or you want to learn about these types of ways to grow, again, virtually, in person, Curtis and I are both available in different capacities to help talk more in depth about this if somebody wanted to reach out to either one of us. But really, the challenge today that I think we want to put on everybody is to take a step back, write down some of the things you're doing if you do feel stuck, and ask yourself, whose belief is it? And sometimes the most powerful thing that you can do is question the story you've been handed, or the story that you've been living. And I just think that if you do that first step and write it down, and you get serious about being uncomfortable for a minute with yourself and asking that hard truth question that you normally make excuses for, you will find a huge window of opportunity for growth. And that's really where Curtis and I both agree that, like, you've got to start with that self-awareness and desire to grow, or none of this works. This doesn't apply to someone who isn't willing to change. But when you are, and you're looking for ways to do it, and you feel lost or don't have the tools, this is a good first step. And so if you like today's episode, please subscribe, follow us on LinkedIn, on our different socials, but also reach reach out, emails, questions. Curtis, one of the last things I want to do is just give you kind of an opportunity really quickly for the listeners that might have questions on what you do or what your ideal client works like, or maybe they want to talk to you in more depth since we've talked about your executive leadership and legacy building. Walk us through that. How does somebody get a hold of you, and who's the best who would you be looking for in that regard?
I mean, the best way to get in touch with me is actually on LinkedIn. So if you just find me on LinkedIn, and I'm sure, Caleb, you'll have my LinkedIn address that people can access. So if you just reach out, connect with me on there, I'm always willing to connect and network with other professionals. I do tend to work more with senior leaders or emerging leaders, and usually it is specifically on the leadership development side of things. So not so much on the technical aspects. While I do work with a lot of technical level professions such as, CTOs, CIOs, things like that. It is more on strictly the leadership development aspect. So talking to building critical thinking, strategic thinking, boardroom etiquette, things like that. But anybody that does want to reach out and just connect or have some good, strong professional conversations, always welcome to them. So that would be about it.
Awesome. And I will absolutely include your LinkedIn profile in the links to all of the different channels that we put this out to. And for those that are looking on the personal side of things, two of the things that I focus on is really about personal growth, just the overall idea around how to get out of your own way. And the other is just on relationships in general. One of the key things I think has changed the way I look at things in the real world is in business. I've been a manager of small teams, large teams, and you're managing all these things. And at the end of the day, you're really not managing products and services. A lot of times you're managing the personal relationships and the relationships within the organization in that regard. And so that makes you a really good relationships manager. When you do it right, then productivity and output from those employees drastically increases, and you no longer have such a hard problem managing the products and services. But it's the relationships that get built with inside the organization that matter. And I've learned that that also is true on the outside world. When you get out of business and you look at your personal life, it's about relationships. And some of the things I'm going to bring through the next episodes, we're going to have really great conversations like we did today. We're going to dive into how I view relationships. I'll give you a sneak peek, is I use a grading system, and there's a reason behind that. And there's an idea behind that has really changed the way I viewed my friendships and my marriage and my family relationships. And I think that's going to be a really great topic coming up in the future. So we want to continue to challenge, inspire, and help you all evolve. Hence why I enjoy you listening to the Evolv podcast. Curtis, thank you so much again for being here. Greatly appreciate it. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.